Good evening and welcome. Welcome to Food Addiction, Fair and Firm. FAIR stands for Food Addiction is Real. Most of you know that if you're suffering from it. FAIR stands for Freedom is Recovering Mindfully. I do appreciate you being here with me tonight and joining me for this weekly educational and conversational discussion about food addiction. I'm Dr. Connie Stapleton, and I've worked in the addiction arena for the past nearly 30 years, and I've worked in the bariatric field for the past 15 years. I love what I do, and mostly because I get to work with enthusiastic people like you who are working to find some peace from addiction, to find a healthy way to live fully. I have a couple announcements to make while we get started. And the first one is, you may have seen it on my Facebook page. I'm really excited. And it's that my book that I've been talking about, Weight Loss Surgery Does Not Treat Food Addiction, is now available. I cannot tell you how excited I am about this. It's been a labor of love. It's been in the works for quite a while, and I have to thank my husband, who has just been working around the clock to help me, and my son, who does the graphic designing. He made the cover. My daughter Kelsey does nearly everything for me, and my daughter Erin cheers me on. I also want to thank Vera Tarman, the author of Food Junkies, which I really recommend everybody read, because she wrote the little bit on the back endorsing my book. So I'm real excited about that. Also, last week, while we were doing Food Addiction Fair and Firm, I was anxiously awaiting the arrival of my 7th grandchild. And so as soon as I got off the computer, I ran to the hospital where labor was well in progress. And we welcomed our 7th little grandchild, a little boy named Evan. In the middle of the night, I want to tell you. And then I had to go to work on Thursday morning, and then I flew to Iowa on Friday. So it's been a busy time and a very exciting time, and I'm really excited to see all of you here. So here we go. Tonight we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. You know, the last couple of weeks we've been talking about what food addiction is, and if any of you are familiar with Tenny McCarty, Tenny describes addiction very simply as, if you can't take or leave it, you're probably addicted to it. So if that applies to you where food is concerned, well, you're probably addicted to it. And Vera Tarman, of course, says, and we talked about this last week, abstinence first, absolutely. And what she means by that is, in order to find recovery from food addiction, you have to abstain from your trigger foods. Some people, as we talked about, have 1 or 2 or 3 trigger foods, and some people have large categories of trigger foods. The most common with food addiction are the categories of sugar and white flour and simple carbs. I may have mentioned this to you before, that when I went through treatment for alcohol and drug addiction 28 years ago, they told us at that time, you might want to abstain from sugar and white flour. So it was known way back then that there was a correlation between alcoholism and food addiction in terms of sugar and white flour. Research has done nothing but confirm that and reaffirm that over the years. So tonight I want to talk about when it comes to giving up your trigger foods, when it comes to abstaining so that you can progress into learning how to live fully, how to deal with the cravings, how to deal with the obsession of food, how to deal with life on life's terms, whatever's going on in life, without turning to food for being soothed by. You have to abstain from the substance. And the reason for that is because if a person's addicted to something, whether it's alcohol or drugs or shopping or gambling or whatever it is, it's all the same. your head's cloudy. You're not thinking clearly when you're active in your addiction. And that's because, in part, addiction is a brain disease, right? It affects your neurochemicals when you're using or when you're even thinking about it in some cases. You have increased levels of dopamine. Your body responds literally, physiologically, to billboards. It can respond to a commercial. And you have to have it out of your system to be able to think clearly. It's like a fog in your brain. So that's what we mean by abstaining. And then you move on to the recovery process. And recovery means more than, we talked about this last week too. Recovery means a whole lot more than simply being abstinent or drug-free. So if you give up sugar and white flour, that's the first step. If you're a food addict, if you're an alcoholic, you got to give up alcohol. If you're a gambling addict, you've got to quit gambling. You have to give up your substance or your behavior in order to be clear-minded enough to get into recovery. So abstinence alone means you're what we call a dry drunk. You still have all the negative thinking associated with addiction. You still have, the same emotions. So recovery is working through the emotions associated with whatever. Could be past stuff, present stuff, all kinds of things. But there's a big resistance to being in recovery. So tonight we're going to talk about that resistance. And I want you to be thinking as I'm talking, and I want you to type some things about why a person might be resistant to getting into a program of recovery, which means not just abstinence, but learning to deal effectively with cravings, learning to deal effectively with other people, improving your communication skills, learning how to set boundaries with people, learning to set boundaries with yourself is part of it. What is it that keeps us like, yeah, I know that's a great thing, I know it's a great way of life, I hear it all the time, but not sure if I'm quite ready for that. Fear of the unknown was typed, and that's a huge reason that we resist going all in. In the world of addiction, you hear people talk about their bottom, right? That means how low did you have to go physiologically, emotionally, in terms of losses in your life before you were willing to surrender and say, I need help, I need to let go of this substance in order to have a fuller life. Recovery feels overwhelming. There's a lot of emotions behind our using. In AA, people talk about having a high bottom or a low bottom, and this is true for other addictions as well. But I'm going to use this as an example because I've experienced this, and then we'll come over and talk about high and low bottoms where food addiction is concerned and the resistance, okay? So people, when you go to meetings or you listen to recovering people talk, if they're talking about having had a low bottom, meaning, when did you decide enough was enough? A low bottom usually suggests that the person has had a lot of loss in relation to their addiction. So maybe a person has had several DUIs and it costs them lots and lots and lots of money in attorney fees and fines and etc. They may have spent time in jail. Some people who talk about low bottoms have spent time in prison. Some have lost jobs because of their addiction. Some have lost families because of their addiction. Some have, contributed to the loss of lives because of their addictions. And it's like, I finally had to say enough was enough, and I knew I needed help. In contrast, some people have a high bottom. I would say that I had a high bottom in comparison to some of the people who have experienced those things that I just described. I never had a DUI. Mind you, I could have had hundreds of them because unfortunately I did drink and drive. But I never got that. If I had, maybe I've gotten into recovery sooner, right? Another thing is I hadn't lost my family, I hadn't lost my job, I had lost a lot of self-respect. I had lost a lot of respect from other people. And the thing is, with a high bottom, it just means I haven't suffered those more severe consequences yet. And I say yet because addiction is a chronic disease like obesity. It's not going away. There's not a cure for it. It's going to get worse over time unless you find recovery or remission from the active disease. So the remission comes from abstaining. Okay, so that gives you a chance to work toward recovery. So why do we resist this? And the reason that I finally said I need help, because I was in fear of this close to losing my family, and I didn't want that to happen. So another way to talk about this is, what's your force? So for those people who've had weight loss surgery, most people that I talk to, and I've done probably 5,000 pre-surgical evaluations, most people, their health is at a very serious bottom, right? There's diabetes, there's blood pressure that's really high and uncontrolled with medication, there's high cholesterol, there's been heart attacks. Health is a major reason where people say, okay, I need to have weight loss surgery, because without it, it's going to be really difficult for me to get enough weight off to improve my health. The other reason that people very commonly tell me they have weight loss surgery is because they don't have the quality of life that they once had and that they really want back. They're unable to, do things with their families. They can't go to the amusement parks and ride the rides. They can't go to the zoo because they can't walk through the zoo because they don't have the stamina. So usually, the bottoms with food addiction are, my health is suffering severely, or I don't have a quality of life that I'm happy with. Even still, some people are really resistant or reluctant, even if they've had surgery, or even if they've lost weight without surgery. Some people lose over 100 pounds without surgery, and yet they gain it back because without the weight, without the food, they have to do certain things. So some of the comments people have said are, you don't want to deal with the void. What void? Good question. I totally agree with that statement. And again, nothing I say is across the board or pertains to everyone. Take what fits for you. But a lot of people don't want to let go of their addiction, in this case food, because they don't want to face the void. If I've done this before, you put your hands up here, and because all you see and think about is food and food related things and the Food Network and the recipes and the scales and if I let go, there's all this stuff around me, and what if what's around me is a void and emptiness? That's pretty scary. It might be a lot easier to hang on to the food, to hang on to the addiction. All right, let's see what some other people put. It feels overwhelming. Absolutely. If you've lived in this cave of food and food addiction for a long time, doing this and seeing all the rest of what's out there is hugely overwhelming. Dealing with your body at a lesser weight can be overwhelming. Not to mention dealing with the other people who are talking to you about your lesser weight. That can be overwhelming. The difference in ways people treat you can be overwhelming. The ways you see yourself in the mirror and the ways you think about yourself can be overwhelming. So feeling overwhelmed is often one of the big resistances, the reasons we hold on to our addictions. Somebody else said, dealing with the emotions behind the eating. Huge, huge, huge issue, right? I think that's one of the most common ones for a lot of people. What emotions? Maybe any emotions. We've talked about feelings, right? A lot of people have addictions so they can cut off their connection to themselves and their feelings. I don't want to feel sad. I don't want to feel fear. I don't want to feel anger. I don't want to feel powerless. I don't want to feel things related to my past. I don't want to feel my fear in relation to my children in the present. I don't want to feel the anger and frustration I have in my marriage or with my family of origin or whatever it would be. I don't want to feel it. Food is my number. We talked about that last week, right? That's one of the definitions. It's like this is an emotional number when I use food. Let's see what other people shared. Let's see. Resistance. All right. Tunnel vision, absolutely. Afraid of failure, absolutely. Afraid of failure, and other people are afraid of success. And I can talk about that a little bit in just a minute because I do a whole presentation on fear of failure and fear of success. That can also be framed as I resist recovery because there's a lot of responsibility that might come with it. And I don't want to be responsible for long-term success because I'm afraid I can't do it. So that would be the fear of success and the fear of failure, right? There's a lot of responsibility I'm accepting if I give up my drug. I accept the responsibility of dealing with my life, my feelings, my current circumstances, and doing it appropriately. But if I don't have the skills to do that, I'm afraid. I'm afraid I don't know how to handle all that responsibility. So maybe it's just easier to stay in my little food addicted bubble because I don't have to. Nobody expects me to. So I avoid responsibility. That's one of the reasons we resist, right? What about the diversion that food and addiction provide for us? A diversion from what? What do you think addiction diverts us from? Well, I think feelings are one of the biggest things, right? If I'm using food or alcohol or shopping or gambling or whatever to go, oh, I don't want to deal with that at the end of the day, to shut off my feelings, to numb myself, then I'm diverting myself from anything that is part of my life. Maybe I don't want to go home and deal with my marriage. Maybe I don't want to go home and deal with the kids and all of their issues and their stressors and their whatever. Maybe I don't want to go home and deal with my aging parent. Maybe I don't want to go home and deal with my loneliness. Maybe I don't want to go home and deal with, an empty house. So an addiction diverts us from current circumstances, the feelings associated with those current circumstances, and the responsibility of being a healthy adult and dealing with them in healthy ways. Another diversion would be, this is probably the biggest one actually, a diversion from myself. Most addicts, listen up here because this is, I'm giving you the bottom line, and we're not even through the list of reasons we are resistant to recovery, but I believe that the bottom line, the thing we are most resistant to, the thing we hang on to our food addiction or our other addictions to the most, the hardest, is because we want to divert ourselves from ourselves. Do you like spending very much time alone by yourself? Doing absolutely nothing, no reading, no phone, no company, no television, no radio, no iPad, no Kindle, no nothing. No dogs, no cats, just you and you. I was terrified of me. I was terrified of being alone with me. I used to think, oh my God, what am I going to do when I get old? Because the last thing I want to do is spend time by myself. Recovery leads us to finding peace within ourselves. Addiction is largely about not being at peace with ourselves, being very ill at ease with ourselves. We're going to talk about this a lot more in the weeks to come. But most addicts, regardless of what we have an umbrella of addiction here, and it could be any addiction, but underneath that umbrella, most addicts feel the same way inside, and the core of the core of the core is, I'm not good enough. Something's not right with me. I'm not okay. That is called shame. And I think the thing that most of us want to avoid more than anything is facing our own shame. So, we avoid recovery. We hang on to our addictions. We resist letting go of the food or the alcohol or the drug or the credit card. Now, that's going pretty deep, right? That's going way down the layers. But in addition to, and on the way down to getting honest about that part, here's other reasons why people hang on to their addictions. Is your food not soothing? Is that not one of the best ways you know how at this point in time to soothe yourself? Food gives us comfort. Temporary, mind you, but in the moment, it can give you a great deal of comfort. So it's soothing, it's self-soothing. Okay, this might sound a little off, but I've seen it very, very often. Being overweight, and again, not all food addicts are overweight, so for those persons who do suffer with obesity, who do suffer from the disease of obesity, in addition to maybe food addiction, being overweight is sometimes, it's either maybe a way to be invisible or a way to get attention. What do I mean by that? Well, maybe if you are at a healthy weight and food's not a complete obsession for you, maybe people wouldn't have to help you. If you're morbidly obese, maybe it's the only way you know how to get attention or to ask for help. You're going to have to think about that, because most people's initial reaction is going to be, no, right? But give it some thought. And again, this is not going to fit for everybody, but for some people it's like, maybe my kids wouldn't hang around and help me if I didn't need their physical help. Or maybe my husband wouldn't dote on me or pay any attention to me. Or maybe my wife wouldn't nurture me if I didn't physically need their help because of my weight. And I'm afraid nobody would pay attention to me if I lost that. Now, I don't know if that fits for you, but there might be a little bit of truth to that. What about feeling in control? I debated for a long time tonight about what I wanted to talk about first. If I wanted to talk about this resistance to letting go of the substance, because remember, we have to be abstinent first. That means getting rid of the addictive substance. So the resistance to that is a big thing. And I thought, well, I can talk about that. But the other thing I really want to talk about, which I'll probably talk about next week, is this control factor with food and addiction and weight and obesity and letting go of control. A lot of times I'm reading these posts and people are saying, if I could just get a handle on this, if I could just get a grip on this, if I could just maintain control. That's going the opposite direction, my friends. All right? Think about a river. And a river has a current, right? And sometimes that current is really, 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 really strong. And if you're in that river, floating down the river, it's easier to go with that current than it is to fight against that current. That applies in a lot of ways in life, but we're going to talk about it in terms of control tonight. Because addiction has a powerful, powerful current. You are not going to beat addiction by trying to swim upstream. You are not going to control it. You are not going to latch onto it and hold it in place and make it behave. You cannot control addiction. You cannot get a grip on it. You cannot get control of this food thing. You have to let go of control. Oh my God. Talk about scary, right? But it's the truth. You got to go with the current of addiction instead of fighting it. We're going to talk about what that means next week, but I really want you to think about that. And here's a statement that was told to me over and over when I went into recovery, and it literally took me years, and I still struggle with it sometimes, but the statement was, you have to let go of control to have control. You have to let go of control to gain control. So we're going to talk about that next week. But that's one of the big resistances to getting rid of your addiction. That's one of the big reasons for holding on tightly to it, because you're afraid to give up control. But that's exactly what you have to do, because you don't have any control over an addiction, my friends. An addiction is way more powerful than you or me alone. That's why we need support. That's why we need to immerse ourselves in learning how to live in recovery. Let's talk about the fear of the unknown, right? Maybe you don't know how to live in a thinner body. If you lose weight, you don't know how to do that. It's a foreign territory. We all like the familiarity of our comfort zone. And if you've been heavy for a long time, that is your comfort zone, even though it's very uncomfortable, right? Kind of a dichotomy. But living outside of that, especially when you have weight loss surgery and you lose that weight so rapidly, is it puts people way off balance in a very big hurry, because this is so far outside their comfort zone and they don't know how to deal with it. So that might be a reason to hold on to it. So fear of the unknown, fear of having a different body, fear of giving up your identity. Maybe you've always been known as the heavy one. Maybe you've always, maybe that's just your identity, and without your weight, or without you being the one who brings all the food, or is always talking about food, or joking about food, or joking about your weight, I don't know. But letting go of that is letting go of a huge part of your identity. So redefining yourself can be a very frightening thing, right? Okay, somebody posted, and this is very true, that weight can be a huge protector, right? Remember, 60% of people who struggle with obesity have been sexually abused as children. I didn't make that up. That's a fact. 60% of people who struggle with obesity have been sexually abused. If I lose weight, I'm afraid people will see me as a sexual being. And that's how we can hide ourselves, by being large and by holding on to our food addiction. So, feeling in control, maintaining identity, self-soothing, avoid feelings, avoid sex. If you're overweight, you maintain this food addiction, you maintain your weight to avoid sex. That might be part of it. You avoid relationships to a great degree, right? Because maybe you don't know how to have good friendships, and being overweight keeps you away from engaging in those. And again, a lot of heavy people have wonderful friendships. They have wonderful marriages. They have wonderful relationships. It's not everybody, okay? But for some people, those statements fit, right? What I want you to think about and post in the group about is how your food addiction keeps you from yourself. And what is it about yourself that you don't want to get to know? What is it about yourself that you're afraid of? What is it about yourself you don't like? What is it about yourself that you don't want other people to see? Because I promise you, at the core, at the bottom, at the very center of all addictions lies this dissatisfaction with self, this separation of self from self. But I'm telling you, when you get into recovery and you start to let go of the guilt and the shame and the stinking thinking, and you get support and you get fellowship and you help other people and you allow them to help you, you start to say, you know what, I have value. I have value. And it's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be me. So I want you to use the daily form that I've provided and make sure you give yourself a ton of credit every day for a thing that you did well that day. It's a great thing to do. Have a party, just have a party in your head about how great and awesome it is that you did this one thing or that one thing, all right? Every one of us, like Laura's saying, has tremendous value. We are valuable human beings. We're on this earth to share our value with one another and to respect and appreciate the value that we have as well. So, who knew food addiction had to do with all of that anyhow, right? Gosh, this time goes so quickly. I am overjoyed to be able to share my experiences, my lessons, the stuff that other people shared with me, with you. And I love seeing you guys all share with one another. Please join the group. Please go to the group. Please post on the group. Share your vulnerabilities. Share your successes. Just share yourself because it's helping a lot of other people. And next week, then, we're going to talk about this control thing. Food addiction and control, and letting go of control. All right. Think about being willing to let go of your resistance, to abstain from those substances that keep your brain fogged, your brain hijacked, so that you can move forward into a life of recovery. It's great, I promise you. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you again next week, same time. Thanks much.